Hey everyone, what's up? It's Finch here. Today we're going to be discussing the new tiering radar for the Scarlet and Violet overused metagame. 8 Pokemon were selected to be added to the radar. While I do not see a world where more than 2 or 3 of them are banned, I do want to discuss all 8 of them in the metagame and go into some detail as to why they're added and why we are at where we are at. First and foremost, if you guys do not recall, I recently posted a video on the Translation Suspect, which ended with no action. For more on that, check out my last video, or check out the post on the Smogon forums I made on that as well, which concluded a suspect, as I did run that vote myself, alongside the OU Council. In addition, I do want to go ahead and say thank you guys so much for following the metagame, playing the metagame, and voting if you did participate in the suspect test. It was a really fun time, and I hope a lot of you guys enjoyed. With that said, though, we do have bigger and better matters to discuss here, as we now have a tiering radar to discuss some potential bans. What's going to ultimately happen is the council will vote on these, and a couple Pokemon with overwhelming support might get quick banned, and then a couple Pokemon in the future might get suspect tested so the community can vote on them. Ultimately, I want to note that this is a pretty unique radar, as we have a couple Pokemon that are maybe more finesse oriented, such as Garganacl, more of a defensive Pokemon, and Cyclizar, more of a utility Pokemon. A couple Pokemon that are really sheerly offensive Pokemon, such as Chi-Yu and Chien-Pao. Then a couple of dedicated sweepers like Espathra and Dragonite, and then some Pokemon that kind of have a combination of roles. For example, Annihilate is actually a Pokemon that thrives on its defensive ability to tank hits so that Rage Fist can be boosted, so it functions offensively in tandem with defensively. And then Goldengo, which is a more offensively oriented Pokemon, but it's largely on the radar due to its utility and its ability, which is interesting. So we've got a lot of unique cases, not necessarily as many just outright punks trying to break through the metagame, you know what I mean? Just Chi-Yu and Chien-Pao in that regard. And I think this kind of versatility speaks to an element in our metagame that is a little more diverse, a little more unique. You know, it's not like any other generation, and seeing these Pokemon surface so early on is very unique, and I'm excited to see where the future of our tier goes, of course. But right now, we do have some moves to make, some improvements to make, and the start of that would go with Chi-Yu. And I actually wrote up a whole post here. I'm not going to read you guys the whole post. I'm not going to go through it. I wrote up sample sets. I wrote up paragraphs in each Pokemon, you know, the whole bang. Basically, what I'm going to say is this. You guys are going to watch this like it's a podcast episode. I'm just going to be discussing for 10-15 minutes what's on the radar and why. And then I'm also going to link the post in the description. That post will have written explanations, which is basically what I'm saying in written word if you prefer that. And it's also going to have sample sets. So if you want to try these Pokemon out yourself with, you know, the most proven, the most battle-tested strategies, then you'll be able to do that. I hope that is satisfactory. Of course, let's go ahead and get into Chi-Yu. Chi-Yu with Beads of Ruin has the equivalent of 197 base special attack. It could run Specs or Scarf very well, as well as heavy-duty boots with Nasty Plot. Very few things check it. You know, Tyranitar is the only universal check. Things like Blissey or Chansey can even be broken through by choice specs with Terra Fire. And in addition to that, Nasty Flat sets can break through pretty much any wall, even unaware walls, with the right timing and potentially terrorization as well. Choice Scarf is a bit more wallable by things like Roaring Moon, maybe Multi-Scale Dragonite, Quaquaval, special defensive Tox Specs, and Tinglu, for example. But even then, a Terra Fire, the things that don't resist fire can get worn out, or Dragonite or Tox Specs can get flinched down, and if you enjoy Specs, then none of those Pokemon actually check it either. So it's just very potent Pokemon, you know, something you don't want to be dealing with in this metagame, and in my eyes, it completely warps team building. You know, it forces you to use very offensive teams, and even then they lose to Scarf, or defensive teams can beat Scarf, but they lose to Specs. It's kind of a I'm screwed if I do, I'm screwed if I don't type of dynamic, and having something that's equal to 197 base special attack is unsurprisingly a little unreasonable for the metagame. Next up, we have Cyclizar. Cyclizar is interesting because, like I said before, it's not an outright offensive presence. Quite the contrary, it does very little offensively, but rather, Shed Tail enables some of the most dominant offensive and setup-based presences, making it so that setup spam and offensive breakers, you know, normally they've got to switch in safely or fight or something and have some opportunity cost to them. In this scenario, they don't. They get a free entry and potentially even a free substitute if you predict the right around what's coming in or what's attacking into the Cyclizar. And Shed Tail is not the focus here because Cyclizar has speed and Regenerator that Earthworm does not. Earthworm's actually in UU currently, and it's viable in OU, but it's not particularly good. You know, it's not broken. So if we have the move Shed Tail, that's not a problem at all in one Pokemon. and it's very problematic on other Pokemon, then you have to look at the other Pokemon, Cyclizar, and say, oh, it has Regenerator, it has this speed, and that combination is truly why Cyclizar might be worthy of attention. It might not be. We'll vote and see. It didn't get enough support the last 2 times, but if it were to be, it is clearly a Cyclizar problem. And Cyclizar, part of Cyclizar is Shedtail, of course, but you can't isolate Shedtail when Earthworm is just not on its level or not even on this radar at all. With this said, though, Cyclizar is a master catalyst. It can really set up, teams that have a great abundance of setup sweepers and giving them free turns with, again, no real loss there, no fodder, no damage taken, no potential prediction is so rough. Even if the substitute's broken, that's still a free entry, no damage or anything, no fodder. And that, that ability to do that multiple times with Regenerator especially goes such a long way towards solidifying Cyclizar as one of the best Pokemon in the tier and arguably an unhealthy supporter in this metagame. Next up we have Annihilate, which it's so weird because this is such a dinky line, a Primate line, but then Annihilate all of a sudden gets so much bulkier. It retains a lot of the great things you had before in the speed and attack. It gains a ghost typing, and Rage Fist is really the be all end all here. In that if you get attacked, you're doing more damage. You run taunt and you outrun walls, so you can't really force them status you or anything like that. You're getting attacked, and suddenly you're forced to get stronger while you're just taking weak attacks. And the taunt, bulk up, Rage Fist, Drain Punch set is really problematic. Offensive teams can contain a little bit, but if you Terra into a more neutral type like Water, then you can tank a lot of hits and do damage no matter what they try and do to you. Hit you with a Fairy or a Flying attack, you think it's super effective. You become a Water type, and all of a sudden it's not quite there. All in all, Annihilate is really hard to deal with. Oftentimes it takes a Rocky Helmet Garchomp plus a Salt Cure Garganacl or an Unaware Curse type Pokemon and getting the turns right with some sort of chip damage and hazard. For defensive teams it takes 2 or 3 Pokemon, whereas offensively speaking you have to guess a lot around it, especially with it being able to Terra into a Water or even a Fire type. And that definitely dwarfs how we play around it and makes it, an amplified threat. In its worst case scenario, it can often carry its own weight. And in some games, it'll take a multi-Pokemon effort to even combat it, getting multiple kills or forcing chip on what feels like half or even more of your team. And then even then, you might just be forcing out, not killing it. So Annihilate, definitely one of the stronger Pokemon and probably on net average, one of the best Pokemon for Pokemon in the game, if you will. Something to keep an eye on there. Personally, I will be voting Van on these 3 first Pokemon I mentioned, but probably not anything else. But there are still 5 other Pokemon. Let's discuss them briefly here. Chien-Pao, very threatening Pokemon. Sword of Ruin makes it so that defense is dwarfed a little bit from the opponents. Of course, it is kind of Mega Weavile. It has the extra little bit of speed. It has the extra bit of power, and on top of that, it has access to Crunch, so no knockoff distribution. That kind of fixes that. Ice Spinner is a great move. Sacred Sword coverage is awesome, and it just a little more bulk and a lot more base power, just due to the fact that while it has only 120 attack, something like Weavile might have in that ballpark, it has the ability Sword of Ruin to really dwarf a lot of walls. Some things can wall it though. Things like Dondozo and Quaquaval and Azumarill can kind of minimize it. Scarf Shiyu can revenge kill it. And in addition to that, defensively, things like Garganacl can check it, and also just Terra timing, it kind of makes it a bit of a guessing game, and that's unfortunate, but you can definitely play around Chien-Pao with your own Terra, or if they predict you to Terra and you get that right, things like that. Coupled with the fact that it's very weak to priority, things like Dragonite becoming a normal type, so it doesn't only not die to ice types, but also Extreme Speed does 1,000,000, or things like Bullet Punch from Scizor can do a great deal. Mach Punch Breloom also gets an honorable mention, but Ice Shard is more and more common, especially on Choice Banded, so Breloom's not too reliable. Speaking of Choice Banded, it's running it more and more, Chien-Pao is, and that is great because it's very strong. You can break through walls. Crunch doing 1,000,000 to things like Dondozo, for example, is laughable, especially if you tear into a Dark type. However, it leaves you very weak to hazards, and suddenly you're only getting in 1 or 2 times safely, unless you're paired with a lot of support. And being support intensive, at least can limit you, pigeonhole you into specific teams, and that ultimately, in my opinion, somewhat balances Chien-Pao. It's a bit of a saving grace, so I'm curious to see where it'll go, but for now I don't think it's ban-worthy. Garganacl is a more defensively menacing Pokemon, and I definitely think it warps team building. It forces you to run certain offense presences if you want to break through it, or things like Covert Cloak if you want to manage it on the defensive end of the spectrum. And I definitely find this, to be a negative impact on the metagame, something that really limits you when you're going for the team building checklist. But at the same time, I don't know if it necessarily crosses the threshold that things like Chi-Yu or Annihilate might. and I find it hard to isolate as a ban-worthy presence, but I think we need to keep it on our radar, and I think a couple people will vote ban, and I wouldn't be shocked to see it suspected, because it's one of the most, prevalent Pokemon in the metagame. It really does warp how we play, Garganacl is just so strong, and seeing it as a centerpiece in balance teams, not only does it cover a lot, which we might arguably need right now, but also it can, do so much chip with Salt Cure and Purifying Salt, making it immune to status and so many other things. It's just such a great tool, beat the Stealth Rock, Protect, Salt Cure, Recover set, just chipping through teams left and right, especially when paired with status and hazard entry, or the Iron Defense set that really can be a great win condition and functions both on hyper offense setup spam teams and on balance teams as like a nice win condition. It can go such a long way, and it also is a great Terra user into more of a neutral typing such as Water or Fairy. It can go such a long way towards not only making it, a great wall, which it already is, but also making it harder and harder to break, especially when you're more neutral things in such great bulk. So yeah. Lastly, we have Espathra, Dragonite, Gholdengo. Espathra first and foremost, Carmine, Stored Power, and Terra, a great trio there, but metagame is definitely adapted to it more and more. We see some certain steel types like Gholdengo and Scissor being able to deal with it quite nicely. If it's Terra Fairy, things like Chi-Yu can also deal with it pretty handily, whereas if it's Terra Fighting, it relies on Terra to hit Terra Blast into a fighting type, so it uses that opportunity cost. You're basically pigeonholed into doing that if you want to hit any dark type. If you're encountering something like a King Gambit, a Chen Pao, for example, you can't store power them, of course, so you have to Terra Elastalize, and that's great, but that's such a huge opportunity cost. It sinks your whole strategy, and people can see through that they can play around it. Also, things like Trick, Status, and Priority from Fizzor, normal Dragonite, even Chen Pao, if it's Banded Ice Shard, can go a long way. Obviously, Sucker Punch mind games, with Terra goes a long way, and Protector Substitute. So Espathra is kind of okay against that, but it's definitely Pokemon that you wish you could run 5 moves on it. It's really great, but it's definitely limited. There's definitely counterplay. Maybe there's a little bit of guesswork to it, which I don't love, but I feel as if more and more time it's become more and more manageable. Maybe a month ago I would have thought it would be ban-worthy, but I'm not there anymore. Dragonite is just a really good Pokemon. It's not a ban-worthy Pokemon. I wasn't the one who wanted on the radar personally, but some others did, and that's completely understandable. It's such a great Pokemon, but with things like Will-O-Wisp, Rotom Wash, Toxic Toxapex, coupled with all the unaware users, it's very easy to dwarf defensively, in my opinion, without going too far out of your way, especially considering those Pokemon are needed for other reasons as well. And offensively, you can pressure it. Becoming a normal type and losing a lot of weaknesses can go a long way for it, for sure. Makes it very threatening, and once you get a couple boosts and you're an offensive team, it's got normal extreme speed, you could forget about it, but pressuring is possible. I definitely find it to be manageable, but one of the better Pokemon. I group it in the great to like metagame defining presence, but not necessarily ban-worthy right now. That can change. Sets are adapting. We're seeing, more Ice Spinner to hit things like Great Tusk, Opposing Dragonite, Garchomp, which is awesome lately. But there are still things that could wall. There's no real way around things like Dondola. It's running like a Hurricane set, so it'll be interesting to see what it does. I can see why it's on the radar, but I'm not going to personally be voting ban. And finally, Gholdengo. Offensively, it's awesome, but offensively it doesn't really break it. It's just very good, not broken. But the ability to mitigate, hazard counterplay, no defog into it, rapid spins block because you're a ghost type. Air balloon sets actually can, beat Tusk like that. He's awesome. We do see Libero, Cinderace using Core Change now and then, but I don't think that's had the effect people quite imagined. All in all, though, I think Gholdengo is great. Is it broken, though? I don't think so. It's metagame defining. It impacts a lot of the dynamics we see, a lot of interaction we see, but I wouldn't group it there. And as of now, I'd say it should stay in the metagame. So yeah, what do you guys think? Do you think that any of these Pokemon should be broken? I personally think, again, Chi-Yu definitely, and Cyclizar and Annihilate probably. And I think I'll be voting ban on those Pokemon. Not sure on the last 2 yet, but definitely Chi-Yu. What do you guys think? How about the other 5? How about those 3? Let me know down below in the comments. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe. Thanks for watching, guys. Appreciate it. Have a great day. Okay, bye.